But I mean, Nina, to stay with you for just a moment, I mean, is there any evidence that people in eastern Ukraine want to be part of what is emerging as a failed state? I mean, Russia is about to default on its debt. It's a country that is being starved economically by the world. It's a country that is now reviled around the world. It's essentially an outlaw state. Is there any evidence that people in Crimea, which was a beautiful sort of port, capital that's got this beautiful waterfront, or that people in Donbass are not anything but miserable being under Russian control? Is there evidence that they want to be a part of what is emerging as a failed state?
Well, there's no evidence that people in Crimea have been miserable under Russian control. I mean, that really has not been, there is no evidence to that. And many who remained in Crimea did want to be part of Russia, of course. And we talked about in this program not once that Putin clearly deeply overplayed his hand. And so nobody, even Russians, don't want to be part of Russia. That's certainly the case. But to say that, they never wanted to be that. I mean, that's why Donetsk and Luhansk became part of the Russian sphere, because they wanted that. The question is whether we will continue to want that. I mean, about 300,000 Russians now fled Russia itself. So that is certainly a question, but I don't think that would give Putin any pause to say, well, didn't work out, and now I'm going to let everybody go. In fact, it's going to be the other way around. The less people want to be part of his state, the more he is going to force them to be. So yes, in this sense, we can talk about Russia as a black hole, as a North Korea of 11 time zones, and even more now because Ukraine is 1 hour closer to Europe.
Ben, there is this talk of trying to come up with some sort of a peace deal that would somehow end this horror. I mean, 3.8+ million refugees and counting. As you just heard Nina say, some 300,000 Russians even leaving that country. Let's talk about this, because I don't know how you come up with a peace deal when the dictator in Russia is deploying the Wagner Group. We now have new, news that he is using these Wagner Group mercenaries. He's using all over Africa. These are brutal mercenaries. That he's now gone to that. He's essentially gone full terrorism inside of Ukraine. At what point can you negotiate a peace deal with someone like that? Because Ukraine saying they'll be neutral seems to me to be immaterial to Putin. They're neutral now. They were neutral when Crimea was seized. They're not a part of NATO. So being neutral hasn't seemed to help them before. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is also important, though, to look at Donetsk and Luhansk, too, because Putin certainly did not get resistance, violent resistance in Crimea. But from 2014, I don't think that there was some popular uprising in the Donbass region to want to join Russia. I think the Russians basically stirred up and really sent people into the Donbass to try to stir up Russian-speaking populations there. And what we've seen, Joy, is that the pretext for this war was in part the defense of Russian speakers or ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. Look at the places that have been treated the worst in this conflict. Kharkiv, Mariupol, these are cities with enormous populations of Russian speakers, and Putin has killed those people indiscriminately, completely indiscriminately, right? In the same way that he's terrorizing the people of Donbass. So first of all, no, I think it's very clear that Ukrainians don't want to live under Russia. Nobody has welcomed Russia in this invasion. Second, I think that the question of neutrality, sure, of course, Ukraine can and should put that on the table. I think we should support whatever positions they take in these negotiations. But the question is, even if they make a statement of neutrality, what happens to that Russian presence in the Donbass? Because this is a big chunk of Ukraine. And if Russia thinks it's going to just digest this big chunk of Ukraine and maybe connect Mariupol to that, so that they have their land bridge between Crimea through Mariupol to the Donbass, this was the more minimalist objective that some people thought was going to be Russia's objective back in February. Clearly, Putin wanted something more than that, but he might feel like he's backtracking to that position. But if you're Ukraine, how can you accept a huge piece of your sovereignty essentially being consumed on top of a commitment of neutrality? And also, is there any sense that the Ukrainians who live in these places would just submit to that? There's not. So right. I think neutrality is, yes, it's an opening in terms of okay, maybe the basis of some longer-term peace negotiation can essentially be around Ukrainian neutrality. But as long as these questions of Ukrainian sovereignty are unresolved, and what is Ukrainian land, and what can the Ukrainians accept in terms of what is their land, I still think we're much further away from a really lasting peace deal. And that's why I think the Ukrainians are being skeptical that maybe the Russians are dangling something like neutrality as the basis for talks, so there can be some kind of ceasefire, so that they can stop the supply of weapons going to Ukraine and they can lick their own wounds and then resume their military offensive. I think we have to be very cautious about whether or not NATO neutrality alone would be enough to resolve these massive questions about, are the Russians going to leave Ukrainian land? And Crimea may be, again, one thing to accept, but the Donbass, I think, is much, much more challenging, as well as Mariupol and the other lands that Russia is currently occupying.
Right. And, Nina, the other question is whether or not, I mean, Putin is obviously, he may not want to show fear openly, but this is a man who has banned Russian TV from playing Volodymyr Zelensky's speeches. He's obviously afraid of this man. He understands the power this man has developed, around the world, that he has the sympathy of the world, no matter what madness and fake, Nazi regime BS he tries to pull. It doesn't work. And Zelensky is winning the information war, as well as it does feel like his troops are winning the war. So could it be that the world's best bet here is just to put the gas on, which is why I think, to put the gas on, the rhetoric that President Biden used, more sanctions, maybe, moving Ukraine closer to NATO, because giving them the jets, because it does seem like that's the only language Putin will understand.
I actually don't think that that's the only language Putin understands. Because he has never shown that he understands the language of force. He himself uses force. In this sense, I mean, I think also you and I compared it in other programs. In this sense, he's very Donald Trump, is that if you give him, he's going to give you 10 times more. I think that, I'm not a military analyst in any way, but I do think that neutrality is the beginning of a conversation, although I don't think that Putin is going to stop. For example, he takes Mariupol. What about Odessa? Odessa hasn't even come into conversation yet, but it will, because Odessa was originally, the way they see it, as a Russian city. Why does it have to belong to Ukraine? So it is. You can ratchet sanctions up, and that's fine, but they're no longer economic sanctions. They're actually killing civil society as well. And so the question is where everything is canceled, either from the outside world or from Putin. And I don't think it's that fear per se. It's that he's a KGB man. He's a man about control. Who are you to speak up and tell me how I should behave? The more you tell him, the more he pushes back. And so the question is, do we really want Russia as North Korea collapsed? I guess we do, because there is a collective responsibility. Russia has to pay for Putin more than other countries have to pay for their dictators. But at the same time, that is 145 million devastated from the inside and from the outside as well.